The rich neighbor's spoiled son challenged a single dad unaware he was a former Navy SEAL. The entire neighborhood fell silent when 24-year-old Brandon Walker stepped forward, pointed his finger, and shouted, "Come on, old man." Everyone expected the quiet single father standing across from him to back away in embarrassment. After all, Brandon was young, wealthy, and used to getting whatever he wanted. But nobody knew the truth about the man standing behind the wooden fence. Nobody knew that years earlier, he had served as a Navy SEAL, sacrificing everything for his country before returning home to raise his daughter alone. What happened next changed the neighborhood forever, and it taught everyone a lesson about kindness, respect, and the hidden battles people carry inside their hearts. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more heartwarming stories to people around the world. David Carter had lived on Maple Street for almost 3 years. Every morning, he woke up before sunrise, prepared breakfast for his 12-year-old daughter, Emma, and then headed to work. He lived in a small house with peeling paint and an old wooden fence that needed repairs. Life had not been easy since his wife had passed away years earlier. Even so, David never complained. He always smiled, waved to his neighbors, and offered help whenever someone needed it. If an elderly neighbor needed groceries, David carried the bags. If a child lost a bicycle chain, David fixed it. If someone needed advice, he listened patiently. Most people appreciated his kindness. Unfortunately, Brandon Walker was not one of them. Brandon was the son of Charles Walker, the wealthiest man in the neighborhood. Their enormous house stood at the end of the street, surrounded by expensive cars, beautiful gardens, and tall iron gates. Unlike his father, Brandon had grown up believing that money could solve every problem. He often laughed at people who had less than he did. To him, David was simply an old, tired man living in a small house. One afternoon, Emma was planting flowers in front of their home when Brandon drove past in his brand new sports car. Music blasted from the speakers as he accelerated down the narrow street. "Slow down," Emma shouted. Brandon only laughed. David stepped outside immediately. "There are children playing here," he said calmly. "Please be more careful." Brandon rolled down his window. "Mind your own business, old man." David remained calm. "My daughter's safety is my business." Brandon smirked before driving away. The next morning, David discovered that his old fence had been damaged. Tire marks covered the grass nearby. He quietly gathered his tools and started repairing the broken boards. As he worked, several neighbors offered to help. "Don't worry about it," David said with a smile. "We'll fix it together." An hour later, Brandon appeared with several friends. They stood nearby, laughing as David worked. "That fence belongs in a museum," Brandon joked. The others laughed. David continued hammering nails into the wood. Then Brandon stepped closer. "Maybe you're too old for this kind of work." David looked up and smiled politely. "Maybe. But the job still has to be done." Brandon folded his arms. "People say you're some kind of hero. I don't see it." David remained silent. Brandon pointed toward the fence. "Strength isn't measured by how loudly you speak. It's measured by how kindly you treat people." Brandon rolled his eyes. "That's ridiculous." Just then, Charles Walker arrived. He immediately noticed the damaged fence and the crowd standing around it. "What is going on here?" he asked. Before anyone could answer, Emma spoke. "Brandon has been making fun of my father." Charles turned toward his son. "Is that true?" Brandon shrugged. "We were just having fun." Charles looked disappointed. Then one of the older neighbors stepped forward. "David has helped every family on this street," she said. "Last winter, he repaired my roof during a storm." Another neighbor nodded. "He fixed my generator when the electricity went out." A third person added, "He watches the neighborhood children whenever parents are running late." Charles stared at David. "Why didn't you ever mention any of this?" David smiled. "Because kindness isn't something you announce. You simply do it. At that moment, Charles noticed an old photograph hanging inside David's garage. The picture showed David standing alongside several soldiers. "Wait a moment," Charles said. "You served in the Navy?" David nodded. "For many years." Charles moved closer. "Were you a SEAL?" David hesitated for a second before answering. "Yes." The crowd fell completely silent. Brandon's confident smile disappeared instantly. "You were a Navy SEAL," he whispered. David nodded again. "That was a long time ago. These days, I'm just a father trying to raise a good daughter." Brandon looked down at the ground. "But why didn't you tell anyone?" David picked up another piece of wood from the fence. "Because people deserve respect for who they are, not for titles they once had." For the first time in years, Brandon seemed embarrassed. Without saying a word, he grabbed a hammer lying on the ground. "Can I help repair the fence?" he asked quietly. Emma looked surprised. David smiled. "Of course." For the next several hours, neighbors worked together under the warm afternoon sun. People shared stories, laughter, and cold drinks. By evening, the broken fence looked better than ever. As everyone prepared to leave, Brandon walked toward David. "I'm sorry," he said. "I judged you without knowing anything about you." David placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do afterward." Years later, people on Maple Street would still talk about that day. They wouldn't remember the argument or the challenge. Instead, they would remember how one man's patience and kindness transformed an entire community. Brandon eventually became one of the most generous people in the neighborhood. He learned that true strength comes from humility, compassion, and respect. And David continued doing what he had always done, helping others without expecting anything in return. The truth is that every person you meet is fighting battles you cannot see. Some carry painful memories. Others carry loneliness, fear, or regret. That is why kindness matters so much. You never know whose life you might change with a simple smile, a helping hand, or a few encouraging words. And perhaps the strongest people of all are not those who seek attention, but those who quietly choose kindness every single day.